Welcome to this third meeting of David against Goliath. As you can guess immediately, the language tonight will be English. Also, at the very end of the reading and of the comment, I will chat in three languages, Italian, French, and Spanish too. The third reading is dedicated to The Raven by Edgar Allan Poe. Of course, talking about Edgar Allan Poe, it would take hours, but a short intro, I think, is necessary just to give you some instrument to understand better the reading I'm going to develop in a minute. So why this poem is a masterpiece, and still nowadays we are fascinated by these verses. No doubt that the contents is not important in this poem. Maybe this statement can sound a little bit a provocation to your ears, but I'm saying that the contents is never a novelty. Of course, the poem is a narrative one. There is the story of this man who has lost his love, and he's totally upset, totally heartbroken inside his dark room until something happened. Well, the poem has a narrative rhythm, but what makes this poem really a challenge to the whole literature is how it was written. So many times, Edoardo Sanguinetti said that the poem is the solution of a problem. Well, the prototype of this sentence is Edgar Allan Poe, who, in the philosophy of composition, he declared that he applied a mathematical approach to the poem. Of course, you can't imagine that he was writing numbers or applying formula to poetry, but he had a mathematical concept of the poem. For example, just to say one thing about it, the first stanza I wrote is not the first, but it is the third from the bottom. The stanza which start with prophet said I, prophet said I. So just starting from the bottom and not so for the beginning, it is no doubt a rational approach to poetry. But I think the really amazing mathematical surprise is the choice of that word, which is the key of the whole poem. Of course, I'm talking about the word nevermore. You will hear this word so many times during the whole reading. And Edgar was attracted by this word. So the poem started not from the contents, not from the sorrow of the man who had inside, but the poem started from this charming word called Nevermore. It is a poem which was loved, first of all, by Charles Baudelaire. When, of course, it was written, nobody noticed the importance of this poem, which is obvious, of course. It took 1 century or more before of being totally valued. Charles Baudelaire translated this poem 3 times, but he was never satisfied. And of course, he was not satisfied. This poem, in my opinion, is impossible to be translated, especially this word, which is the key work of the whole poem, Nevermore, which was chosen because of these croaking sounds, and it is, of course, a perfect trochee. Trochee is a Greek meter where you have the accent on the first foot, but I don't want to talk about this, probably later. So Nevermore, just like the trochee of another famous poem written by William Blake with Tiger, Tiger, Burning Bright. These are again trochee. So this poem is impossible to be translated. Charles Baudelaire had 3 translations, but it was difficult, of course, to be appreciated. I think now it is useless to go on. I think it's time just to read the whole poem. And then at the very end, as I told you, I stay here. I can here able to chat. You can write in case you have questions. You have a few on your part of the screen, and then I can answer. This is the unique way to interact. Give me just a few seconds, and then I will start reading the poem. The Raven. Once upon a midnight dreary, while I pondered, weak and weary, over many a quaint and curious volume of forgotten lore, while I nodded, nearly napping, suddenly there came a tapping, as of someone gently rapping at my chamber door. "'Tis some visitor," I muttered, tapping at my chamber door, "only this and nothing more." Distinctly I remember it was in the bleak December, and each separate dying ember wrote its ghost upon the floor. Eagerly I wished the morrow. Vainly I had sought to borrow from my books surcease of sorrow. Sorrow for the lost Lenore, for the rare and radiant maiden whom the angels name Lenore, nameless here for evermore. And the silken, sad, uncertain rustling of each purple curtain filled me with fantastic terrors never felt before, so that now, to still the beating of my heart, I stood repeating, "'Tis some visitor entreating entrance at my chamber door, some late visitor entreating entrance at my chamber door. This it is and nothing more." Presently my soul grew stronger, hesitating then no longer. "Sir," said I, "or madam, truly your forgiveness I implore, but the fact is I was napping, and so gently you came rapping, and so faintly came tapping at my chamber door, that I scarce were sure I heard you. Here I open wide the door, darkness there, and nothing more. Deep into the darkness, peering long, I stood there, wondering, fearing, doubting, dreaming dreams no mortal ever dared to dream before. But the silence was unbroken, and the darkness gave no token, and the only word there spoken was the whispered word, Lenore. This I whispered, and an echo murmured back the word, Lenore. Merely this and nothing more. Back into the chamber, turning all my soul within me burning. Soon again I heard the tapping. somewhat louder than before. Surely, said I, surely that is something at my window lattice. Let me see then what there it is and this mystery explore. Let my heart be still a moment and this mystery explore. 'Tis the wind and nothing more. Open here I flung the shutter when with many a flirt and flutter is there stepped the stately raven of the saintly days of yore. Not the least obeisance made he, not an instant stopped or stayed he, but with mien of lord and or lady perched above my chamber door, perched upon a bust of Pallas just above my chamber door, perched and sat, and nothing more. Then this ebony bird, beguiling my sad fancy into smiling, by the grave and stern decorum of the cantoness it wore. So thy crest be shorn and shaven thou, I said. Are sure no craven, ghastly grim, and ancient raven wandering from the nightly shore? Tell me what thy lordly name is on the night's Plutonian shore. Quoth the raven, Nevermore. Much I marvel this ungainly fool to hear discourse so plainly, so its answer little meaning, little relevancy bore, for we cannot help agreeing that no living human being ever yet was blessed with seeing bird about his chamber door, bird or beast upon the sculptured bust above his chamber door with such a name as Nevermore. But the raven sitting lowly on the placid bust spoke only that one word as if his soul in that one word he did outpour. Nothing further than he uttered, not a feather than he fluttered, till I scarcely more that matter other friends have flown before. On the morrow he will leave me as my hopes have flown before. Then the bird said, Nevermore. Startled at the stillness broken by a reply so aptly spoken. Doubtless, said I, what it utters is its only stock and store, caught from some unhappy master whom a merciful disaster followed fast and followed faster till his songs one burden bore, till the dirges of his hopes that melancholy burden bore of nevermore. But the raven still beguiling all my sad into smiling, straight I wheeled a cushioned seat in front of the bird, and bust and door. Then upon the velvet sinking I betook myself to linking. Fancy unto fancy, thinking what this ominous bird of yore, what this grim, ungainly, ghastly, gaunt, and ominous bird of yore meant in croaking Nevermore. This I sat, engaged in guessing, but no syllable expressing to the foal whose fiery eyes now burned into my bosom core. This and more I sat divining, with my head at ease reclining on the cushion velvet lining that the lamplight gloated over, but whose velvet violet lining with the lamplight gloating over she shall press, nevermore. Then methought the air grew denser, perfumed from an unseen censer, swung by angels whose faint footfall tinkled on the tuft floor. Wretched, I cried, thy God has lent thee, by these angels he has sent thee respite, and nepenthe from thy memory of Lenore. Quaff, oh, quaff, this kind nepenthe and forgot this lost Lenore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. Prophet, said I, think of evil, prophet still, if bird or devil, whose whether tempest sent or whether tempest tossed, see here ashore, desolate, yet all undaunted on this desert land enchanted, on this home by horror haunted. Tell me truly, I implore, is there balm in Gilad? Tell me, I implore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. Prophet, said I, think of evil, prophet still, if bird or devil, by that heaven that bends above us, by that God we both adore, tell this soul with sorrow laden, if within the distant Aden it shall clasp a sainted maiden whom the angels name Lenore, clasp a rare and radiant maiden whom the angels name Lenore? Quoth the raven, nevermore. Be that word our sign of parting, bird or fiend, I shrieked, upstarting. Get thee back into the tempest and the nice Plutonian shore. Leave no black plume as a token of that lie thou soul has spoken. Leave my loneliness unbroken. Quit the bust above my door. Take thy beak from out my heart and take thy form from off my door. Quoth the raven, nevermore. And the raven, never flitting, still is sitting on the pallid bust of Pallas just above my chamber door, and his eyes have all the seeming of a demon's that is dreaming, and the lamp light over him streaming throws his shadow on the floor, and my soul from out that shadow that lies floating on the floor shall be lifted nevermore. After such a reading, one should need to meditate a little bit about the beauty of words, because at the very end, the poem is made of words. As Hamlet answered to Polonio, who asked him, "What are you writing, Hamlet?" And he answered, "Words, words, words." It is always the same problem. So a poem is made of words, but it depends how they are interconnected. Okay, I do thank Jonas Rigo for this question. I can read to everybody. Can you explain the relation between poetry and mathematics? I think this relationship is connected with an adjective, which is being conscious. So the poet can never write by instinct or improvisation. the poet must be conscious of what he's doing. Again, so you are not writing a diary, so you can't write just by chance. So you need to you did a theory, of course, and you need to reflect. So the concept of mass applied to the raven is full of many suggestions. For example, as I told at the beginning, the first stanza, which was written, is not the first, but it is the third, starting from the bottom. So it means that he controlled the creation. So when you write the first stanza, you know, of course, how to organize the whole material, and nothing is flying away. It is under your control. We need acts of rationality in this case, which was a famous sentence by a musician, by experimental musician, Gad Varese. So Edgar Allan Poe, before writing, he declared, this poem must not last 100 verses, 100 lines, what I've just read. So he declared that the length of the whole poem had not to exceed the 100 line. So that is very interesting statement. So why not 50 lines? Why not 150 verses, but only 100? Because according to him, he wanted to reach an effect writing that poem. So the effect was the effect of melancholy, of sadness. And to reach the effect of melancholy, of sorrow, according to him, of course, it was necessary to write at least 100 lines. So the creation was totally under control. He started from then, and then he started writing from the beginning, of course. Once he had the effect, he said, what is the most melancholic item to face? What is the saddest thing that can happen to a man when that man loses his love? And so he created this story about this solitary man in his own room, totally upset because his Lenore died. And this man lives in a sort of trance because the sudden event of the raven which comes into the room is lived by him just like a metaphor, because he's speaking to the raven. The raven does not speak, but in the poem, the raven speaks the unique word that I was talking at the beginning and that you heard so many times during my reading, nevermore. But nevermore was the first word which attracted Edgar Allan Poe. The word is really interesting because this sound of n and r and e, nevermore, so it is a trochee, as I told at the beginning, but it is a word full of sound, full of energy. And at the beginning, he thought to use a parrot inside the poem, but the parrot with the colored feathers probably was not fit for the concept of sorrow and the sadness. And then he thought of the raven, of course, the American raven, not the European one, which are bigger and just like a seagull. Once he decided to use the word nevermore, in the poem, he did pretend that, again, another rational, if you want, approach, again, a mathematical approach to poetry, he did pretend to use the word nevermore spoken by a bird. So it could be correct to pronounce nevermore, not just like in the human way, but just like the raven has, or sort of nevermore, nevermore, like this, no, croaking, something like this. Well, but let me go on about this connection existing between math and poetry. Once he decided to write the poem, of course, it was a narrative poem, as I told at the beginning, because we have at the beginning the man alone, then he's suffering, he thinks that some visitor is going to find him, but it is not a visitor, it is a raven who comes into a bust of Pallas. And that is very interesting, the fact that the black of the raven comes into the whiteness of the bust of Pallas. So this contrast between black and white is one of so many precious events which are happening inside the poem. So once he decided to use the stanza, he planned how to write the stanza. So again, another mathematical statement. Each stanza must end with nevermore, or with a sort of paranomasia, like nothing more or evermore, something more. This was a rule. So the rule is, I start, of course, writing my poem, but each stanza must end in that way. So it means that when you write, you have to organize the material in that way, and not only. So it is not easy, if you think, to conclude a stanza in that way, because when he uses the word nevermore, it does make sense absolutely inside the strategy of the stanza. You have just listened to my reading. So in one case, nevermore is the answer to the question of the man who said, "What's your name?" Nevermore. Or tell me, there is a balm just to use and to calm my heart, and the raven, nevermore. But tell me, one day when I die, shall I be allowed to clasp, to see, to talk with my lost Lenore? And the raven, nevermore. So you see, the end of each stanza is organized for that effect. Not only, now I don't want to have a talking about, of course, metrics, it could be really boring, but the stanza is organized with the length of line with the same length of syllable. Is using trochee, as I told you, ta, 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 nevermore. So with this musicality, but not only this, so not only the length of the stanza was controlled, perfectly dominated by Edgar Allan Poe, also the subtle, the exciting pattern of the rhymes. You heard me while I was reading, I tried to stress, to emphasize this phonetical beauty that Edgar used really a lot. So you have many rhymes, but also internal rhyme, which means so that the same sound in the middle of one line is repeated at the end, and then again in the following line, again in the middle. So it is an explosion of musicality and the sound. As Ezra Pound, another great famous American poet, used to say, poetry is really a phonetical dance between words. And I think that Edgar Allan Poe is really the living proof of this sound, of this musicality. Well, I have to say probably the last statement about this relationship existing between math and poetry, and the magical word is repetition. Just a rhyme is a repetition, of course, a sort of phenomenon of echo, no? The same sound repeated. But during the whole poem, he did insist on the technique of repetition. Consider that the Russian scholar Jacobson will declare at the beginning of the 20th century that repetition is the most important feature of poetry. So when you have repetition, and here repetition is really the main structure of the poem, repetition of the rhyme, repetition of the word nevermore, but also it's the same word repeated many times into the same stanza, like beguiling, like nepenthe, you know, with this sentence when he mimes the act of drinking with this quaff, 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 the onomatopoeia when you drink. So the whole poem is full of repetition, and you have only unbelievable, a unique metaphor in the whole poem. So, and it is when he speaks about the peak into the heart of the man. So, take thy peak out from my heart. So, the fact that he answered nevermore, nevermore, nevermore to all his question, so he has no hope. So, go away. Fly away and take out your plume, your peak, and so on, because I don't want to see you. So, as you see, writing a poem needs a lot of knowledge, apart from the sensibility. So, when you write a poem, the last trouble is exactly what to write. So, first of all, the real question is how to write. And just to conclude the answer to this question, I can quote Alfredino Giuliani, who was one of the Gruppo 63 with Nanni Balestrini, Antonio Porta, Elio Pagliarani. Alfredino Giuliani used to say that many people in the world write poetry. Many people, millions, but only few, very few, can make poetry. Okay, if I don't see any further question, I want to say that the fourth meeting next Wednesday, the same time, will be about two great authors, in a way opposite, but unified by the great sense of experimentalism. One is the German Arno Holz, where I translated a couple of books of his in the past decade. And the other is the French-Argentine writer Julio Cortázar, with this Glíkico. I will read, of course, some part from Arnolf and Julio Cortázar, and the meeting will be in Italian and Spanish. So thank you for being here. I wish you a nice evening and see you next Wednesday.